I'd like for us today to talk about Christianity in the media. Media is a general term that just refers to a means of communication. Media encompasses both the vehicle used to do the communication and the communication itself. The simplest way to think of media is a book. A book is a form of media. The book itself is the device that communicates. And then the inside of the book, the contents of the book, is what the book communicates. Now, the Bible, of course, is media. The Bible is a piece of a book with a binding. This is the vehicle that communicates something. And what the Bible communicates, in very simple terms, is the Christian faith. Now, of course, we know that the Christian faith is founded upon Jesus, but there are no independent historical accounts of Jesus from his time. And so the Bible is the way that we know about Jesus. And so the Bible is the media that communicates the Christian faith. Of course, people didn't always have Bibles. In ancient times, all books had to be hand-copied, and somebody had to just sit down and write it out, and you can imagine how long that would take. And so you can imagine that there weren't very many Bibles floating around back then, and very few people had them. But then in the 1400s, a man came along named Johannes Gutenberg. He was from Germany. And he noticed that if you held a piece of paper up to a mirror, the writing appeared to be backwards. And he also noticed that the writing on a page could be broken down into its individual letters. He took those ideas and got to work and came up with the printing press. In about the year 1450, he invented the printing press. When you set the type on a page, you could print as many copies of that page as you wanted to. It was truly a revolutionary invention. His printing press was an immediate success. It is estimated that in the first 50 years, over 12 million copies of books were printed in Europe. And remember, that was in the 1400s. One of the very first books Gutenberg printed was the Bible. It's called the Gutenberg Bible. It was the first printed version of the Bible ever made. And it was the version in use in the Roman Catholic Church, so it was in Latin. And for the first time in history, Bibles were commercially available. Now, granted, it was in a language most people could not read. It was in Latin. But still, you could get a Bible. And Gutenberg's Bibles sold as fast as he could print them. It would seem that that would be a good thing, that all would welcome it. You would think the Roman Catholic Church would say, hey, it's a good thing for everybody to have their own Bible now and be able to read it. But they were not. They saw Gutenberg's Bible as a threat. The position of the Roman Catholic Church was that you did not need to read the Bible. They'll read it and tell you what you need to know about it. And this gave them tremendous power. They stood between you and the Bible, and everything you knew about the Bible was filtered by them. And they liked it that way. They saw Gutenberg's printing press as a threat. And so shortly after the year 1500, the Roman Catholic Church issued an edict that said nothing could be printed without their approval. And that's back when the Catholic Church also exercised political power. Then along came a German Catholic priest by the name of Martin Luther. Martin Luther had a number of grievances against the Catholic Church, and in 1512 he summarized those in a writing he called the 95 Theses. This was printed, and it was widely distributed, and it spread like wildfire. In 1522, Martin Luther published the first German translation of the New Testament. And in 1534, the first German translation of the Old Testament and Apocrypha. Now, Germans could read the Bible in their own language. And Luther's 95 Theses, combined with these Bible translations, sparked the Protestant Reformation. The printing press made possible the first mass communication. And that means the first time in history where a group of people in widely divergent areas could read exactly the same information. And many historians take the position that without the invention of the printing press, the Protestant Reformation would never have happened. When you look back at it then, you can see the Catholic Church was right to see Gutenberg's printing press as a threat, because the printing press would become the tool that was used to break their iron grip on Christianity. But the printing press not only had effects in Christianity, it had effects throughout the entire society. The printing press made possible the scientific age, because it made possible the wide dissemination of data and the collection of knowledge in widely available reference books. Without the printing press, science could never have advanced the way it did. The printing press also had an effect on the dissemination of news. The first newspaper was published in France in the year 1605, and it was such a success that newspapers and pamphlets sprung up all over Europe. The media is truly a powerful tool. The dissemination of ideas and information is powerful. The next two big inventions in communications were the telegraph and the telephone. While they did affect Christianity, they did not affect Christianity in a major way. But the next big invention, the radio, did. The first radio signal was sent out in the year 1900. In 1915, the first nationwide radio broadcast was made from New York to San Francisco. The first daily radio programs began in 1920. By 1935, you could make a telephone call anywhere around the world through a combined use of radio and telephone. The world was changing, and radio would have a profound effect on Christianity. In 1922, a man named Paul Rader was the pastor of the Chicago Gospel Tabernacle, and he entered into an agreement with the Chicago radio station to produce 14 hours of religious programming every Sunday. This was the birth of Christian radio, and it mushroomed. In 1927, the United States Congress established the Federal Radio Commission, and that issued regulations for radio stations. Congress followed up in 1935 with the Communications Act, and among other things, it required radio stations to set aside a certain amount of free programming each week for public interest programming, and part of that was supposed to include free religious programming. The major Christian denominations and the organizations that they control were allowed to control what would be on these Christian radio programs, and they effectively shut out independent religious organizations. So I want us to stop for a minute and go back to Gutenberg's printing press. Remember, the Roman Catholic Church saw that as a threat and tried to neutralize that threat. When radio came about, the major Christian denominations saw it as a threat to their power, and they tried to control what was broadcast on Christian radio. But independent religious groups started finding a way around that. They decided that they wouldn't necessarily depend on free airtime, they'd just purchase their airtime. And a man named Charles Fuller did that. He produced a program called the Old-Fashioned Revival Hour. By 1939, the Old-Fashioned Revival Hour had 10 million weekly listeners. Now, the national denominations tried to pressure the radio stations not to carry programs like that. This was back in the day when the mainline denominations were powerful. They held a lot of power in American society. And they did have some success in limiting independent Christian groups' access to radio. The next big media advance was in television. Television came on the scene after World War II. And again, the Christian establishment in the United States tried to control what would be shown on religious television programming. The National Council of Churches was the arm of the mainline denominations, and it took over the role of controlling what was being shown on Christian TV programming. Its efforts were largely successful, and mainline Christianity controlled Christian TV programming into the 1950s. But even though the powers that be in Christianity did their best to sanitize Christian TV programming of everything they didn't approve of, 3 preachers were able to break into the market in a big way. Rex Humbard, Oral Roberts, and Billy Graham. All 3 started TV programming that was wildly successful and would remain popular for years. All 3 of those men had an enormous effect on American Christianity. But still, the religious establishment was pretty strong in controlling what was on TV. And in the 1960s, Christians began getting their own TV networks. In 1959, a man named Pat Robertson purchased a small UHF TV station in Virginia, and CBN, or the Christian Broadcast Network, was born. The core programming on Robertson's network was called the 700 Club, and it was a talk show format that talked about political, social, and religious topics. It was also interactive, as you could call in and ask for prayer and talk to someone. You didn't just have to sit there and watch. You call and talk. Now, Pat Robertson would eventually operate TV stations and radio stations throughout the United States, and he became so popular that he even ran for president. Satellite and cable TV would soon come on the scene, and they would open the way for many more Christian TV programs. The most successful has been TBN, Trinity Broadcast Network. It was founded by a Pentecostal couple named Paul and Jan Couch, and it developed into a media powerhouse, had over 500 TV stations, 3,500 cable affiliates, and it owns 26 of its own satellites, beaming its programming throughout the world every day. Who can forget it if you're from around here? Jim and Henry Baker from Charlotte. They built an empire on satellite TV when they first started. I can remember people used to get those humongous satellite dishes and put them in their backyard just so they could watch Pat Robertson and Jim and Tammy. Who could forget Jerry Falwell? In the 1980s, Jerry Falwell started a movement called the Moral Majority. It became a real political force in the United States. That's media. That's TV and satellite and cable. Today, of course, there are many popular preachers on TV. Probably the most well-known is Joel Osteen. His church has an attendance every week of over 50,000. 10 million people watch him on TV every week, and it's estimated 60 million people watch him on the internet every week. But it's not only the major TV preachers that get the airtime. Many local churches broadcast their service. If you can get Channel 9, you can see First Presbyterian Church in Charlotte every Sunday morning. If you have Cablevision in Shelby, you can see First Baptist and Bethel every Sunday. You can listen to Calvary on the radio. And that brings us to today, to the internet. Any church or any religious organization with access to a voice recorder or video camera can film a church service, a Bible study, or any kind of religious program, post it on the internet, where it can be seen for free anytime somebody wants to see it. There's so many of these out there right now that if you put another one out there, it's liable to get lost in the shuffle. There's millions of them out there every week. The major personalities, like Joel Osteen, Joyce Meyer, are ones that most people look at on the internet. But just like on TV, many local churches have their service on the internet. You can look at ours on the internet. Some people live stream theirs on Facebook. And of course, people still have not abandoned the books. The media we talked about first. Christian books sell millions and millions of copies every year. And Christian authors make New York Times bestseller lists. Now I want us to go back and think about the first media we talked about was the book. It was a threat to the powers that be. The Roman Catholic Church recognized it as a threat. They recognized that it could crack the control they had of organized Christianity, and in fact it did. We saw when radio came out, mainline churches in the United States saw it as a threat. We saw when television came out, the mainline churches saw that as a threat too. You know, by the time the internet came out, though, what had been the Christian establishment in the United States had declined to the point where there was no use in them trying to stop anything because they were so weak and powerless by that time. What had been the Christian establishment in the United States by the time the internet came out was now insignificant in American society. Now, media has been a tool to get the Christian message out, if you want to put it that way. You can get religious programming anytime you want to, day or night. It would seem to have been a good thing. Millions of Americans watch church services every week. Millions of Americans listen to Christian podcasts, read Christian books. It's not an exaggeration to say that the media is saturated with Christian material. Without leaving the comfort of your home, you can have access to any kind of Christian service you want. Any kind. And yet, even with all that, the number of people in the United States who claim to be Christians has declined for decades. It is declining now at an accelerating rate. The rate of decline in Christianity is increasing. For all the opportunities the media opened up for Christianity, the media has had negative effects on Christianity. A man named Baron Putnam is a producer of movies. He produced such movies as Chariots of Fire. He gave a speech in 1988, and he said this: "Movies are powerful. Good or bad, they tinker around inside your brain. They steal up on you in the darkness of the theater to form or confirm social attitudes. I suggest that the images of the filmmaker are frighteningly responsible for the attitudes and behavior of the young and the overly impressionable." That was back in 1988, before internet, before Facebook and Google, before iPhones, before Netflix and Amazon Prime, before video games. People back then were exposed to only a tiny fraction of the media that they are today. And remember what he said: images in the media form or confirm social attitudes. They are responsible for the attitudes and behavior of the young and overly impressionable. Media is not just a means of disseminating information. Media forms attitudes. Media forms behavior. People take their lifestyle cues from what they see on TV, in the movie, and in the internet. People form their opinions based on what they see and hear in the media. And of course, people realize that. And so they have realized they can use it to form society into what they want. Assume you want to affect a change in society in some way. You want a certain behavior or a certain attitude that used to be seen as abnormal to now be seen as normal. If you present that over and over and over again on TV, movies, and the internet, you don't even have to promote it. Just present it. Just let people see it. just slide it in there as if it's normal. People will begin to see it as normal. You see, in this way, the media can be used as a manipulation tool. It can form attitudes and opinions in people. It can get people to think and act in certain ways. It can get people to accept certain things as normal. The media has tremendous potential in the dissemination of information, but it is also a tool of social engineering. Media forms people's attitudes and opinions. Media develops the worldview that people have. Media forms the beliefs people have about life and the world. Earlier we heard a quote from movie producer Darren Putnam. I want to read part of that quote again, and then I want to add something else he said. Now he said this speaking of movies, but it's just as true of TV, the internet, social media. Good or bad, they tinker around inside your brain. They steal up on you in the darkness of the theater to form or confirm social attitudes. To an almost alarming degree, our political and emotional responses rest for their health on the quality and integrity of present and future generations of film and television creators. Those who create and control what is on TV, the movies, and the internet hold tremendous power. They determine social attitudes, social opinions, and the worldview of people. And this movie producer says, our future rests upon them exercising that control with integrity. But I think without a doubt they have led society away from Christianity. The media has been a tool to lead society away from Christianity. And it is a force which so far Christianity has been unable to counteract. And this is illustrated in the tremendous decline of Christianity in our lifetime. We live in a world where people's opinions and beliefs and worldview is formed by what they see on the screen. The next generations are formed by what they see on the screen. That is something that so far Christianity has not been able to counteract.